What happens when the galaxy's most elite military academy faces a species they've dismissed as primitive? What occurs when creatures who barely mastered faster-than-light travel are thrown into combat simulations designed for races with centuries of warfare experience? The Galactic Defense Institute was about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one everyone underestimates. When humanity joined the galactic community, they were seen as young, naive, and laughably inexperienced in the art of war. Their technology was basic, their ships were crude, and their military tactics seemed almost childish compared to the sophisticated warfare doctrines of ancient civilizations. But there was something about humans that the galaxy hadn't accounted for, something that would turn a routine training exercise into a legend whispered throughout the stars. This is the story of how one human cadet transformed what should have been elementary battle training into a masterclass that left alien military minds questioning everything they thought they knew about combat, strategy, and the true nature of warfare itself. The massive transport vessel Convergence drifted through the void of space, its hull gleaming under the light of 3 distant suns. Inside its pressurized corridors, representatives from 12 different species made their way toward what would either be the beginning of their military careers or the end of their dreams. The Galactic Defense Institute's Orbital Academy station loomed ahead, a crystalline structure that seemed to bend starlight around its edges, creating an almost mystical appearance that had inspired countless young beings across the galaxy. Cadet Marcus Chun pressed his face against the viewport, watching the academy grow larger as their transport approached the docking bay. Around him, the air buzzed with nervous energy and conversations in dozens of languages, some spoken, others communicated through bioluminescent patterns, chemical releases, or electromagnetic pulses. The diversity was staggering, yet Marcus felt oddly isolated among the crowd. He was one of only 3 humans aboard the transport, part of humanity's first official delegation to the prestigious academy. The other 2 humans, Sarah Martinez and David Kim, had been selected for their exceptional academic records and physical capabilities. Marcus, on the other hand, had been chosen for reasons that even he didn't fully understand. His test scores were good, but not extraordinary. His physical fitness was above average, but not remarkable. And his background was that of a simple farm kid from the agricultural colonies of New Terra. "Look at them," whispered Zarth, a tall, blue-skinned Altarian female standing near Marcus. Her voice carried the melodic quality typical of her species, but there was an unmistakable note of disdain. "The humans think they can compete with us. How amusing." Her companion, a heavily armored Krillian named Vextar, made a sound that Marcus had learned was equivalent to laughter among his species. "Their species has been spacefaring for what, 2 centuries? My people have been perfecting the art of warfare for over 10,000 years. This will be entertaining, if nothing else." Marcus pretended not to hear the comments, though his jaw tightened slightly. He had grown accustomed to such remarks during the journey. Most of the alien cadets viewed humans as newcomers to be pitted or ignored, their inclusion in the academy seen as some sort of charitable gesture by the Galactic Council rather than recognition of any actual merit. The docking procedure was smooth, executed by automated systems far more advanced than anything humanity currently possessed. As the airlock sealed and atmosphere equalized, Marcus gathered his single duffel bag and joined the queue of cadets preparing to disembark. The artificial gravity felt slightly heavier than Earth normal, though not uncomfortably so. The Academy's receiving bay was enormous, its ceiling disappearing into shadow far above. Holographic displays showed orientation information in hundreds of languages and sensory formats, while automated guide drones floated among the new arrivals, directing them toward various processing stations based on their species' physiological requirements. "Welcome to the Galactic Defense Institute's Orbital Academy," announced a voice that somehow spoke directly into each cadet's mind in their native language. Marcus recognized the technology as a neural interface system, far more sophisticated than the crude translation devices humans currently used. "Please proceed to your assigned orientation groups. Your academic and military journey begins now." Marcus found his way to Human Orientation Group Alpha, where he was reunited with Sarah and David. Sarah was a brilliant young woman from the Mars colonies, her specialty in tactical analysis having earned her a full scholarship to the Academy. David came from a military family on Luna, his expertise in combat engineering making him a natural fit for the program. Together, the 3 of them represented the best that humanity had to offer, though Marcus still wondered why he had been selected alongside such accomplished individuals. Their orientation officer was Commander the Lin, a member of the ethereal race known for their advanced telepathic abilities and centuries-long lifespans. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, her translucent skin revealing intricate patterns of bioluminescence that shifted with her emotions. Her large, dark eyes seemed to look right through them as she spoke. "I will be direct with you," Commander the Lin said, her mental voice carrying undertones of barely concealed skepticism. "Your species' inclusion in this program is largely symbolic. The Galactic Council felt it important to demonstrate their commitment to equality and opportunity, regardless of a species' relative development level. However, I expect you to conduct yourselves with dignity and make the best effort possible." Marcus felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger, but he kept his expression neutral. Beside him, Sarah's hands clenched into fists, while David's jaw worked silently as he bit back what was undoubtedly a sharp response. "Your first major evaluation will be the elementary battle training simulation," the commander continued. "This exercise is designed to assess basic tactical understanding and combat readiness. It has a failure rate of approximately 30% among first-year cadets. Given your species' limited military experience, I would not be surprised if all 3 of you find it challenging." The orientation continued for another hour, covering academy rules, dormitory assignments, and class schedules. Marcus learned that he would be sharing quarters with Ziktar, a young reptilian whose species was renowned for their strategic thinking and mathematical precision. Sarah was paired with a crystalline entity from the Silicon Collective, while David would be rooming with a gaseous being from the Nebula worlds. As they made their way to their dormitories, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched and judged by every alien they passed. Conversations seemed to quiet as they walked by, replaced by what he imagined were whispered assessments of the primitive humans who thought they belonged among the galaxy's elite. His dormitory room was spartanly furnished, but comfortable, with adjustable atmospheric controls to accommodate different species requirements. Ziktar was already there when Marcus arrived, the 7-foot-tall reptilian organizing his belongings with methodical precision. His scales were a deep emerald green with gold accents along his spine, and his large yellow eyes tracked Marcus's movements with calculating intelligence. So you are the human, Ziktar said in accented but clear standard galactic. I have studied your species' military history. Brief, but creative, in a primitive sort of way. Your World War II was particularly instructive in demonstrating how inferior technology can sometimes compensate through sheer brutality and numbers. Nice to meet you too, Marcus replied dryly, unpacking his few possessions. I look forward to learning about reptilian military traditions as well. Ziktar's head tilted slightly, a gesture Marcus interpreted as mild surprise. You are not offended by my assessment. Should I be? Marcus asked, hanging up his academy uniform. You're probably right. We are new to this, and we do have limited experience compared to most species here. But everyone has to start somewhere. The reptilian studied him for a long moment. Interesting. Most species would respond with either anger or defensive posturing. Your acceptance of your limitations is unexpected. That evening, Marcus joined Sarah and David in the Academy's main dining facility, a vast space that accommodated the dietary needs of dozens of species. The humans drew curious stares as they navigated the complex food distribution system, eventually settling for nutrient paste that was guaranteed to be safe for human consumption, if not particularly flavorful. This is going to be harder than I thought, Sarah admitted quietly as they found seats at an empty table. It's not just the academic challenge or the physical demands. It's the constant feeling that we don't belong here, that we're some sort of charity cases. Maybe we are, David said grimly, pushing the nutrient paste around on his plate. Maybe the council really did include us just for show, and we're supposed to fail gracefully to prove that they gave us a fair chance. Marcus looked around the dining hall, observing the various species interacting in their small groups. The Altarians clustered together, their blue skin shimmering as they communicated through color patterns as well as speech. The Krillians dominated several tables with their massive armored forms, while the more delicate ethereals floated near the ceiling in a section designed for non-gravity dependent beings. Or maybe, Marcus said slowly, they included us because they think we might actually have something to contribute. Maybe they see potential in us that we don't even see in ourselves. Sarah snorted. Based on what? Our stellar record of fighting each other for thousands of years. Our amazing ability to nearly destroy our own planet through warfare and environmental damage. Based on the fact that we survived, Marcus replied. Every species here comes from worlds that achieved unity and peace before reaching the stars. We didn't. We made it to space while still fighting among ourselves, still dealing with internal conflicts and competition. Maybe that's not a weakness. Maybe that's exactly the kind of experience they need. David raised an eyebrow. You think our history of warfare and conflict is an advantage? I think our history of adaptation and survival might be, Marcus said. Every other species here perfected their military doctrines in controlled environments, against known enemies, with stable governments and unified command structures. We had to learn to fight while everything was falling apart around us. We had to innovate constantly because we never had the luxury of a stable, predictable battlefield. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Cadet Vextar, the massive Krillian from the transport. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, his natural armor plating decorated with ceremonial markings that indicated his high status within his warrior culture. Several other alien cadets followed behind him, creating an imposing group that drew attention from across the dining hall. The human younglings, Vextar said, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. I wanted to meet you properly before tomorrow's simulation. My people value courage above all else, and it takes courage to attempt something you are clearly unprepared for. Marcus stood up, noting that even at his full height, he barely reached the Krillian's chest. Thank you for the encouragement. I'm Marcus. These are Sarah and David. Vextar's mandibles clicked in what Marcus hoped was amusement. I am Vextar, third circle of the Iron Spear clan. Tomorrow, you will learn why the Krillians have never lost a battle in over 3,000 years of recorded history. That's impressive, Marcus acknowledged. What's your secret? The question seemed to catch Vextar off guard. Most challenges to Krillian superiority involved boasting or threats, not genuine curiosity. Discipline, he said after a moment. Perfect coordination. Absolute adherence to proven tactics. Every Krillian warrior knows their role and executes it flawlessly. Sounds effective, Marcus nodded. Very different from how humans approach things, but I can see why it would work well. Again, Vextar seemed surprised by the lack of hostility or defensive posturing. You do not intend to challenge me? Challenge you to what? Marcus asked. You're bigger, stronger, more experienced, and from a warrior culture that's been perfecting combat for millennia. If we got into a fight, you'd probably win. But we're not going to be fighting each other tomorrow, are we? We're all going to be trying to pass the same simulation. The group of alien cadets exchanged glances, clearly not sure how to respond to Marcus's straightforward assessment. They had apparently expected either cowering fear or foolish bravado, not calm acceptance of reality combined with a focus on the actual challenge ahead. The simulation is not about individual combat, Vextar said slowly. It is about tactical thinking, resource management, and leadership under pressure. Areas where experience matters greatly. Then, I guess we'll see how much experience really matters, Marcus replied. Maybe you're right, and we'll fail miserably. But maybe there are different kinds of experience, and maybe the galaxy could use some fresh perspectives on old problems. As the alien cadets moved on to other tables, Sarah shook her head in disbelief. You just made friends with a guy who could probably tear you in half with his bare hands. I didn't make friends, Marcus corrected. I just treated him like a person instead of an obstacle. There's a difference. The next morning came quickly, announced by a gentle chime that resonated through the Academy's neural interface system. Marcus woke to find Ziktar already up and performing what appeared to be a complex series of mental exercises, his scales shifting through various color patterns as he concentrated. Meditation, Marcus asked as he prepared for the day. Strategic preparation, Ziktar replied. I am reviewing tactical scenarios and optimal decision trees. The elementary battle training simulation draws from a database of over 10,000 historical conflicts from across the galaxy. Proper preparation requires extensive analysis. Marcus nodded as he put on his academy uniform. Sounds thorough. I think I'll just go in and see what happens. Ziktar's head snapped around, his yellow eyes wide with what Marcus interpreted as shock. You are not preparing? No research? No strategic planning? No analysis of potential scenarios? Not really, Marcus admitted. I figure the simulation is designed to test how we respond to unexpected situations. If I try to prepare for specific scenarios, I might miss something completely different that comes up. That is, Ziktar paused, searching for words. That is the most illogical approach to tactical planning I have ever encountered. Probably, Marcus agreed cheerfully. But it's worked for humans so far. The simulation chamber was located deep within the Academy's core, a massive spherical room filled with holographic projectors and neural interface equipment. As the cadets assembled, Marcus was struck by the diversity of preparation methods on display. The Altarians moved in perfect synchronization, having apparently rehearsed their coordination extensively. The Krillians stood in rigid formation, each one reviewing detailed battle plans on personal display devices. The Ethereals floated in meditation poses, their bioluminescence pulsing in complex patterns as they engaged in telepathic strategy sessions. Commander the Lin materialized in the center of the chamber, her form slightly translucent as the holographic system integrated with her ethereal physiology. Cadets, today you will face the elementary battle training simulation. You will be divided into mixed species teams and tasked with completing a military objective under combat conditions. Your performance will be evaluated on tactical decision-making, resource utilization, team coordination, and adaptability to changing circumstances. The team assignments appeared on holographic displays around the chamber. Marcus found himself assigned to Team 7 along with Ziktar, a young Altarian female named Lyraneth, and, surprisingly, Vextar. It was an unusual combination, a calculating reptilian strategist, an intuitive blue-skinned empath, a disciplined warrior, and a human wildcard. Interesting grouping, Vextar rumbled as the team assembled. The instructors appeared to be testing how different tactical philosophies interact under pressure. Lyraneth's skin shifted to a pale blue pattern that Marcus had learned indicated concern among her people. The human's presence may complicate our coordination. Altarian tactical doctrine relies heavily on emotional resonance and predictable behavioral patterns. Then, maybe we shouldn't rely on Altarian tactical doctrine, Marcus suggested. Maybe we should figure out what works best for our specific team composition. Ziktar's scales rippled with what Marcus was beginning to recognize as the reptilian equivalent of nervous energy. Military doctrine exists for a reason. It represents thousands of years of accumulated wisdom and proven effectiveness. Improvisation is inherently inferior to systematic planning. Unless the systematic planning is based on assumptions that don't apply to your current situation, Marcus countered. Then, improvisation might be exactly what you need. Before the philosophical debate could continue, the chamber around them dissolved into light, replaced by a detailed holographic environment. They stood on a rocky plateau overlooking a vast canyon system, with multiple bridges spanning the gaps between towering stone formations. In the distance, smoke rose from what appeared to be a military installation under attack. Commander the Lin's voice echoed through the simulation. Team 7, you are a reconnaissance unit tasked with gathering intelligence on enemy positions in the Meridian Canyon complex. Your primary objective is to identify and map all hostile installations while avoiding detection. Secondary objectives include rescue of allied personnel and disruption of enemy supply lines. You have 4 hours to complete your mission. Begin. The team immediately moved into formation, with Vextar taking point as the most heavily armed member. Ziktar deployed a portable scanning device to analyze the terrain, while Lyraneth used her empathic abilities to detect emotional signatures that might indicate the presence of enemies or allies. Marcus stood apart from the group, not participating in their systematic approach, but instead studying the overall tactical situation. The canyon system was clearly designed to funnel attacking forces into predetermined kill zones, with overlapping fields of fire and limited escape routes. Any conventional reconnaissance approach would be detected and eliminated within minutes. The optimal approach is a systematic sweep of the perimeter installations, Ziktar announced, his scanner painting tactical overlays on their shared display systems. We begin with the northernmost position and work our way clockwise around the canyon rim. Agreed, Vextar said. Standard reconnaissance doctrine calls for methodical intelligence gathering with minimal exposure to enemy fire. We maintain communication protocols and withdraw immediately if detected. Lyraneth nodded, her skin shifting to the gold patterns that indicated agreement among her people. I can maintain emotional monitoring to provide early warning of hostile contacts. This approach minimizes risk while ensuring comprehensive intelligence gathering. All 3 aliens looked at Marcus expectantly. He was quiet for a long moment, studying the terrain and the smoke patterns rising from the canyon below. No, he said finally. The simple statement seemed to hit the team like a physical blow. Ziktar's scales shifted to deep red patterns of confusion and irritation. No? What do you mean, no? I mean that approach will get us killed, Marcus replied calmly. Look at the canyon system. It's obviously designed to detect and eliminate exactly the kind of systematic reconnaissance you're describing. The enemy knows we're coming. That smoke isn't from ongoing combat. It's from completed attacks. They're waiting for us to do exactly what you want to do. Vextar's mandibles clicked aggressively. Then, what do you propose, human? Some primitive tactic from your species' brief military history. Marcus smiled, and for the first time since arriving at the academy, he felt completely confident. Actually, yes. I propose we do something they won't expect. Something that goes against every piece of military doctrine they've studied. He pointed toward the canyon below, where the smoke was thickest. I propose we go straight down the middle. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of simulated weapons fire echoing through the canyon system. 3 of the galaxy's most tactically sophisticated species stared at the human cadet as if he had just suggested they attack the enemy positions with harsh language and good intentions. That, Ziktar said slowly, is is the most suicidal tactical suggestion I have ever heard. Probably, Marcus agreed. But it's also the only approach they won't be prepared for. And sometimes, the most dangerous thing you can do is exactly what your enemy thinks you would never be crazy enough to attempt. As the team stood on the rocky plateau, frozen between conventional wisdom and an impossible gamble, Marcus began to explain his reasoning. What he didn't know was that his next words would fundamentally change how 3 alien species thought about warfare, tactics, and the strange, unpredictable nature of human military thinking. The simulation that was supposed to be elementary training was about to become something much more significant. It was about to become the first demonstration of why underestimating humans might be the galaxy's biggest mistake. Vextar's massive form shifted as he processed Marcus's suggestion, his armor plates grinding against each other with the sound of metal under stress. Explain your reasoning, human. Quickly, Marcus gestured toward the canyon system spread out below them. Look at the defensive positions. They're perfectly designed to counter systematic reconnaissance. Overlapping sensor grids, interlocking fields of fire, multiple fallback positions. Someone spent a lot of time and resources setting up the perfect trap for a methodical approach. Ziktar's scanner continued to feed data to his analytical systems, confirming Marcus's assessment. The defensive network is indeed comprehensive, but that does not make a direct assault viable. My calculations show a survival probability of less than 12% for any team attempting to traverse the central canyon. That's if we approach it as an assault, Marcus replied. What if we approach it as something else entirely? Lyraneth's empathic abilities were picking up emotional resonances from the canyon below, her skin shifting through rapid color changes as she processed the information. I sense multiple hostile contacts, but their emotional patterns are strange. Very focused, very patient. They are waiting for something specific. They're waiting for us to do what everyone always does, Marcus said. What every military academy in the galaxy teaches. Systematic reconnaissance, careful intelligence gathering, minimal exposure, maximum information. They've set up the perfect counter to textbook tactics. Vextar's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of deep thought among his people. You suggest we abandon proven military doctrine? I suggest we use military doctrine they've never encountered, Marcus corrected. Human military doctrine. He pulled up a holographic interface, sketching out the canyon system, and marking the known defensive positions. Every species here approaches warfare the same way. Perfect coordination, flawless execution, adherence to proven strategies. It's logical, it's effective, and it's exactly what the enemy is prepared to counter. Ziktar's scales shifted to patterns of intense concentration. Human warfare is chaotic and unpredictable. This is considered a significant weakness in tactical analysis. By whom? Marcus asked. By species that developed unified global governments before reaching the stars? By civilizations that solved all their internal conflicts through logic and cooperation? How much do they really know about fighting an enemy that doesn't follow the rules? The team's shared display system showed the tactical situation updating in real time as Ziktar sensors gathered more information. The defensive network was indeed formidable, with energy barriers, automated weapons platforms, and what appeared to be highly trained defensive teams positioned at key choke points. The central canyon is a killing field, Lyraneth observed, her empathic senses detecting the emotional signatures of soldiers positioned in concealment. Any force attempting to traverse it would be exposed to crossfire from multiple elevated positions. Exactly, Marcus agreed. Which is why it's also the safest route. The silence that followed was longer this time. Vextar's breathing apparatus made a sound like steam escaping from a pressure valve. Ziktar's scanner began running probability calculations so rapidly that the device actually started to emit heat. Lyraneth's skin cycled through color patterns so quickly that she resembled a living rainbow. Explain, Vextar finally rumbled. Marcus pointed to the defensive positions surrounding the canyon rim. Look at the angles. Every weapon emplacement, every sensor array, every defensive position is designed to provide interlocking fields of fire. Perfect coverage of the perimeter approaches. But what happens when you design a defense network with perfect interlocking coverage? Ziktar's analytical mind immediately grasped the implication. Dead zones. Areas where the fields of fire overlap create gaps. Not gaps, Marcus corrected. Blind spots. Areas where the defenders can't shoot without hitting each other. And in a perfectly designed defensive network, those blind spots form a pathway right through the middle of the kill zone. He began marking positions on the holographic display, showing how the carefully planned defensive positions created unavoidable areas where crossfire would be impossible. The more perfect their coordination, the more predictable their limitations become. Lyraneth's empathic abilities were detecting something new in the emotional patterns from below. The defenders are becoming anxious. Their patience is wavering. They expected contact by now. Because every other team has started their perimeter reconnaissance, Marcus realized. They're following standard doctrine, just like the enemy expected. Which means the defenders are focused on the perimeter, not the center. Vextar's warrior instincts were clearly warring with his traditional tactical training. Even if blind spots exist in the defensive network, crossing the central canyon would expose us to detection by multiple sensor systems. Would it? Marcus asked. Ziktar, what kind of sensor coverage are they using? The reptilian scanner provided detailed analysis. Electromagnetic spectrum monitoring, motion detection, thermal imaging, and what appears to be neural activity sensors. Comprehensive coverage of all known reconnaissance methods. All known methods to species that approach warfare systematically, Marcus said. But humans don't always approach warfare systematically. Sometimes we approach it accidentally. He began outlining his plan, and with each detail, his alien teammates looked increasingly skeptical. The strategy violated every principle of military doctrine they had ever learned. It was reckless, unpredictable, and based on assumptions that made their analytical minds recoil in horror. It was also, they gradually began to realize, absolutely brilliant. You want us to pretend to be a maintenance team, Ziktar said slowly, his scales shifting to patterns of disbelief. Performing routine repairs on canyon infrastructure during active combat operations. Not pretend, Marcus corrected. Actually perform maintenance. That's why it will work. The defensive network is designed to detect military threats, not routine maintenance operations. Lyraneth's empathic abilities were providing her with insights into the psychological profiles of the enemy forces. The defenders are highly trained soldiers, focused on military targets. Their pattern recognition systems would filter out non-threatening activity. But the simulation environment includes maintenance protocols? Vextar asked. Marcus smiled. Every simulation environment includes maintenance protocols. How else would you keep the infrastructure functional during extended military operations? The holographic projectors need maintenance, the power systems need monitoring, the environmental controls need adjustment. He pulled up the simulation's background systems, revealing the complex network of maintenance routines that kept the holographic environment functioning. Military strategists focus on combat systems, but maintenance personnel have access to everything. They have to, in order to keep the systems operational. Ziktar's analytical mind was running rapid calculations. The approach has theoretical merit. Maintenance personnel would have legitimate reasons to be present throughout the combat zone. Their activities would not trigger threat recognition protocols. And maintenance teams work in small, mixed-species groups, Lyraneth added, her understanding of social dynamics providing additional insight. Our team composition would appear authentic. Vextar was quiet for a long moment, his mandibles clicking slowly as he processed the implications. This strategy requires us to abandon military bearing and present ourselves as non-combatants. It goes against every aspect of warrior culture. It goes against every aspect of Krillian warrior culture, Marcus corrected. But humans have been pretending to be non-threatening while gathering intelligence for thousands of years. We call it hiding in plain sight. The team spent the next 20 minutes preparing for what was arguably the strangest reconnaissance mission in the history of the Galactic Defense Institute. They accessed the simulation's maintenance databases, downloading work orders and equipment manifests that would provide legitimate cover for their presence in the canyon. Vextar struggled to adapt his natural warrior posture to appear like a maintenance technician, while Ziktar programmed his scanner to mimic routine equipment diagnostics. Lyraneth used her empathic abilities to practice projecting the emotional patterns of bored, overworked maintenance staff, while Marcus familiarized himself with the holographic systems they would supposedly be servicing. This is insane, Vextar muttered as he attempted to carry a toolkit that looked absurdly small in his massive hands. Probably, Marcus agreed. But insanity has advantages. It's unpredictable, it's difficult to counter, and it makes your enemies question their assumptions. They made their way down into the canyon, following maintenance access routes that were clearly marked but completely ignored by the defensive positions above. Marcus led the way, projecting the casual confidence of someone who belonged exactly where he was. Behind him, his teammates struggled to suppress their natural military bearing and adopt the slightly slouched posture of civilian workers. The first checkpoint came sooner than expected. A heavily armed sentry post blocked the main access route, its occupants scanning for threats with sophisticated detection equipment. Marcus approached the checkpoint without hesitation, pulling up the appropriate work orders on his handheld device. Routine maintenance team, he announced in bored tones that Lyraneth's empathic abilities confirmed were completely authentic. Someone reported fluctuations in the power grid down in Section 7. Probably just a loose coupling, but you know how it is. The sentry, a tall humanoid in advanced combat armor, barely glanced at the work orders. Keep it quick. We're running a security exercise, and the area might get hot. Understood, Marcus replied. We'll stay out of your way. As they passed through the checkpoint, Vextar's breathing apparatus made sounds of amazement. They did not even question our presence. Why would they? Marcus asked quietly. Military minds think in terms of threats and objectives. Maintenance personnel are background noise, part of the environment. As long as we act like we belong here, their pattern recognition systems will categorize us as irrelevant. The maintenance access routes provided them with unprecedented access to the entire defensive network. They moved through service tunnels that ran directly beneath gun emplacements, accessed control rooms that monitored the sensor grids, and passed within meters of concealed defensive positions without triggering any alarms. Ziktar's scanner, disguised as routine diagnostic equipment, was gathering detailed intelligence on every aspect of the enemy's defensive capabilities. This is remarkable. We have comprehensive data on weapon positions, sensor coverage, personnel deployment, and supply distribution. Information that would have taken hours of careful reconnaissance to gather through conventional methods. And we're gathering it from inside the defensive perimeter, Lyraneth added, her empathic abilities detecting the emotional states of soldiers they passed. The defenders are focused outward, watching for external threats. They have no awareness of our presence. As they continued their maintenance rounds, Marcus began to appreciate the full scope of the defensive network. It was indeed a masterpiece of military engineering, designed by tacticians who understood conventional warfare perfectly. Every angle was covered, every approach was monitored, every potential weakness was reinforced. But it was designed by minds that thought systematically, logically, predictably. Minds that would never consider the possibility that their enemies might simply walk through the front door wearing maintenance coveralls. The irony is beautiful, Marcus observed as they accessed a control room that provided complete oversight of the eastern defensive sector. The more sophisticated their defensive planning becomes, the more they depend on assumptions about how their enemies will behave. Vextar was learning to appreciate the subtle psychological elements of human tactical thinking. Your species approaches warfare as a form of deception rather than direct confrontation. Sometimes, Marcus agreed. We learned early that being smaller and weaker than your opponent doesn't mean you have to lose. It just means you have to be smarter, more adaptable, more willing to try things that seem impossible. They had been in the canyon for over an hour when they encountered their first real challenge. A security patrol was conducting random inspections of maintenance personnel, checking credentials, and verifying work orders against the central database. Standard security protocol, designed to prevent exactly the kind of infiltration they were attempting. Maintenance team, present identification and work authorization, demanded the patrol leader, a being in advanced combat armor whose species Marcus didn't recognize. Marcus handed over his credentials without hesitation, maintaining the bored expression of someone who dealt with security checks regularly. Power grid inspection in Section 7. Someone's reporting voltage fluctuations. The patrol leader scanned the credentials and work orders, while his team members maintained combat-ready positions. These orders were issued less than an hour ago. Why wasn't this maintenance scheduled during the pre-exercise preparation phase? It was exactly the kind of question that could expose their deception. Standard military procedure called for all maintenance activities to be completed before combat exercises began. Any legitimate maintenance team would have proper scheduling documentation, supervisor authorization, and emergency work protocols. Marcus looked directly at the patrol leader, letting frustration creep into his voice. Because whoever designed this exercise apparently didn't consider that running high-intensity combat simulations puts extra stress on power distribution systems. The grid started fluctuating 20 minutes after the exercise began, and now I get to crawl around in service tunnels while people shoot at each other over my head. Lyraneth's empathic abilities were projecting the emotional patterns of genuinely irritated maintenance workers, while Ziktar's scanner showed exactly the kind of diagnostic readings that would support Marcus's story. Vextar remained silent, letting his imposing presence suggest the kind of muscle that maintenance teams sometimes needed for heavy equipment work. The patrol leader checked their credentials against the central database, which showed that Marcus Chun was indeed a certified maintenance technician with appropriate clearances. The work order was legitimate, issued through proper channels, and the diagnostic readings supported the reported problem. Complete your repairs, and clear the area as quickly as possible, the patrol leader finally decided. Report to Checkpoint 7 when you're finished. As the security patrol moved on, Vextar's mandibles clicked with what Marcus had learned to recognize as admiration. Your species has remarkable psychological skills. You convinced them that we belonged here by becoming genuinely annoyed at having to work during their exercise. The best deceptions contain elements of truth, Marcus explained. I really was annoyed at having to pretend to fix power systems while people point weapons at each other. Making that emotion authentic made everything else believable. They completed their reconnaissance mission by accessing the central command post, disguised as technicians responding to a reported malfunction in the environmental controls. The command post provided them with complete tactical intelligence on the entire defensive network, including troop deployments, supply routes, communication protocols, and contingency plans. By the time they emerged from the canyon system, they had accomplished what should have been impossible. They had conducted comprehensive reconnaissance of a sophisticated defensive network without firing a shot, without triggering any alarms, and without being detected by security systems designed to prevent exactly their type of mission. Mission completed, Marcus announced as they returned to the rocky plateau where they had started. Primary objective accomplished with full intelligence on enemy positions. Secondary objectives include identification of 3 groups of allied prisoners and mapping of supply routes suitable for disruption operations. Commander the Lin materialized in the simulation space, her translucent form showing patterns of confusion and disbelief. Team 7, you have completed the reconnaissance phase in record time with unprecedented intelligence gathering. Please explain your methodology. Ziktar began to provide a detailed technical analysis of their approach, but Marcus interrupted him. We used human tactical doctrine, Commander. We identified what the enemy expected us to do, and then we did something completely different. You abandoned standard reconnaissance protocols, the commander observed. We adapted our approach to the specific tactical situation, Marcus corrected. Standard protocols are effective against enemies who haven't specifically prepared to counter them. When facing an enemy who knows your playbook, the logical response is to write a new playbook. The simulation environment began to shift around them as the scenario advanced to the next phase. The intelligence they had gathered would now be tested against the actual defensive capabilities they had observed. But Marcus had the distinct impression that their unconventional approach to reconnaissance was just the beginning. The real test would come when they had to use their intelligence to accomplish objectives that had never been attempted using human tactical philosophy. As the canyon system reconfigured itself for the next phase of the simulation, Marcus caught sight of other teams struggling with the perimeter defenses they had bypassed entirely. The systematic approach that had been drilled into every alien military mind was proving exactly as ineffective as he had predicted. Vextar noticed his observation. The other teams are failing. They're following their training, Marcus replied. Perfect coordination, flawless execution, adherence to proven doctrine. It's everything they've been taught to do. And it is insufficient, Ziktar concluded, his analytical mind finally beginning to grasp the implications of human tactical thinking. Lyraneth's empathic abilities were detecting something new in the emotional patterns around them. The other teams are becoming desperate. Their careful planning is proving ineffective, and they are beginning to panic. Marcus watched the systematic destruction of conventional tactical approaches playing out across the simulation environment. Teams that represented thousands of years of military evolution were being countered by defenses that had been specifically designed to neutralize their strengths. The galaxy has been fighting the same way for so long that they've forgotten there are other approaches, he realized. They've optimized their tactics to perfection, but optimization can become a weakness when your enemies learn to counter it. As Team 7 prepared for the next phase of their mission, Marcus began to understand why humans had been included in the Academy program. It wasn't charity or symbolic inclusion. The galaxy needed something it had lost in its pursuit of perfect military doctrine. It needed unpredictability. It needed the ability to think outside established patterns. It needed the chaotic, adaptable, impossible to categorize tactical philosophy that humans had developed through millennia of fighting each other when no rules applied, and survival depended on innovation. The elementary battle training simulation was about to discover what happened when human military thinking was applied to galactic standard tactical problems. The results, Marcus suspected, would challenge everything the Academy thought it knew about warfare. And they were just getting started. The simulation environment shifted around Team 7 as they entered the second phase of their mission. The canyon system remained the same, but now their reconnaissance intelligence would be put to the test. Their new objective appeared in holographic text above them: rescue allied personnel and disrupt enemy supply operations while avoiding detection. Marcus studied the updated tactical display, noting how their gathered intelligence revealed opportunities that would have been invisible to traditional reconnaissance methods. We know where the prisoners are being held, we know the supply routes, and we know the defensive patterns. The question is how we use that information. Vextar's warrior instincts were focused on the direct approach. With complete intelligence on enemy positions, we can plan precise strikes against their weakest points. Overwhelming force applied at critical moments. That's exactly what they'll expect once they realize someone has been gathering intelligence, Ziktar observed, his analytical mind working through the implications. Any conventional tactical response will trigger adapted defensive measures. Lyraneth's empathic abilities were detecting emotional changes in the enemy forces below. The defenders are becoming suspicious. Their confidence is wavering. They sense that something has changed, even though they haven't identified the threat. Marcus nodded, understanding the psychological dynamics at play. Military commanders trust their intuition when something feels wrong. The fact that we gathered comprehensive intelligence without triggering any alarms is actually making them more paranoid, not less. He pulled up the intelligence data they had collected, highlighting the locations of the 3 prisoner holding areas and the main supply depot. Traditional tactical doctrine would call for simultaneous strikes to prevent the enemy from reinforcing vulnerable positions. But simultaneous strikes require coordination, and coordination creates patterns that can be detected and countered. Vextar's mandibles clicked with confusion. Then, how do you propose we accomplish the mission objectives? By not accomplishing them, Marcus replied. The statement hung in the air like a challenge to everything his teammates understood about military objectives. Ziktar's scales shifted through rapid color changes as his logical mind struggled to process the contradiction. Lyraneth's empathic abilities detected waves of confusion from her alien companions. Explain this human paradox, Vextar demanded. Marcus began sketching out his plan on the holographic display, and, with each detail, his teammates looked increasingly alarmed. We don't rescue the prisoners. We don't attack the supply depot. We don't accomplish any of our assigned objectives. That is failure, Ziktar stated flatly. That's what the enemy will conclude, Marcus agreed. Which is exactly what makes it effective. He highlighted the prisoner holding areas on the display. These locations are heavily fortified because they expect rescue attempts. The supply depot is defended because they expect sabotage operations. Their entire defensive strategy is based on the assumption that we're trying to accomplish our stated objectives. Lyraneth's understanding of social dynamics was beginning to grasp the psychological elements of Marcus's strategy. You intend to convince them that we have different objectives. I intend to convince them that we failed, Marcus corrected. That our reconnaissance mission was detected, and we're now trying to escape without accomplishing anything. He began detailing a complex deception operation that would use their intelligence to create the appearance of a failed mission. We create evidence of detected infiltration. We stage a pursuit scenario. We make it appear that our team was discovered and is now fighting for survival. Vextar's warrior culture had no framework for understanding tactical deception on this scale. You want to simulate failure in order to achieve success? I want to use their expectations against them, Marcus explained. Every defensive doctrine in the galaxy is designed to counter successful operations. But nobody prepares extensive countermeasures against failed operations. Ziktar's analytical mind was running probability calculations at maximum capacity. The complexity of this deception exceeds any tactical scenario in my database. The risk of actual failure while simulating failure is mathematically significant, which is why it will work, Marcus replied. No rational tactical mind would attempt something this complicated and dangerous unless they were desperate. And desperate tactics from a failing team don't trigger the same defensive responses as carefully planned operations. He outlined the first phase of the deception. They would stage an apparent equipment malfunction in a location where it would be detected by enemy sensors. The malfunction would suggest that their reconnaissance mission had been compromised, and they were now attempting to extract without completing their objectives. Lyraneth's empathic abilities would be crucial for this phase, projecting the emotional patterns of fear and desperation that would make their apparent failure psychologically convincing. I can generate authentic stress responses that their sensors will detect, but maintaining false emotional patterns for extended periods is extremely difficult. You won't need to maintain false patterns, Marcus assured her. The stress will be real. What we're attempting is genuinely dangerous, which means the fear and desperation will be authentic. They moved to a service access point near the main supply depot, where Marcus began implementing the most complex deception operation in the Academy's history. Using techniques that combined human psychological warfare with alien technological capabilities, he created a scenario that would convince the enemy forces that Team 7 was a failed reconnaissance mission attempting to escape. The first element was a carefully staged equipment malfunction that would be detected by enemy sensors. Marcus triggered a power surge in the maintenance systems they had been ostensibly repairing, creating electromagnetic signatures that suggested their cover had been blown. Ziktar's scanner, reprogrammed to emit distress signals, began broadcasting the electronic equivalent of panic as it supposedly attempted to purge sensitive data before capture. The signals were carefully calibrated to suggest intelligence gathering equipment in the process of emergency shutdown. Vextar's role was to simulate wounded team member, using his species' natural armor plating to create convincing evidence of combat damage. His breathing apparatus was modified to emit sounds of distress that would be detected by audio surveillance systems. Lyraneth projected emotional patterns of fear and desperation that were so authentic they convinced even her own teammates. The empathic resonance created psychological pressure that enhanced the deception's effectiveness. Marcus coordinated the deception while simultaneously gathering additional intelligence on the supply depot's operational procedures. The beauty of the strategy was that their apparent failure gave them legitimate reasons to be present in areas they could never have accessed as a successful reconnaissance team. Emergency response protocols brought enemy personnel out of concealed positions to investigate the apparent security breach. Search teams deployed across the canyon system, looking for signs of the infiltration team that had supposedly been detected. Combat engineers examined the evidence of the equipment malfunction, trying to determine what intelligence had been compromised. Every element of the enemy's response provided Team 7 with additional tactical intelligence. The search patterns revealed backup defensive positions. The communication protocols showed command structure and decision-making processes. The investigation procedures exposed security weaknesses that hadn't been visible during their initial reconnaissance. This is incredible, Ziktar whispered as they observed the enemy response from concealment. They are providing us with intelligence on their own operational capabilities. Fear makes people predictable, Marcus explained quietly. They're so concerned about what we might have learned that they're revealing things we never could have discovered otherwise. The stage pursuit continued for over an hour, with Team 7 leading enemy forces through predetermined routes that provided access to areas they needed to investigate. They gathered detailed intelligence on prisoner security protocols by triggering lockdown procedures. They mapped supply distribution networks by forcing emergency supply relocations. They identified command personnel by monitoring crisis response communications. By the time they reached the extraction phase of their deception, they had accomplished far more than their original objectives. Not only had they located and mapped prisoner holding areas and supply operations, they had gained comprehensive intelligence on enemy capabilities that would have been impossible to gather through conventional methods. Phase 2. Marcus announced as they reached a predetermined position near the canyon rim. Now we accomplish our actual objectives. Using intelligence gathered through their failure deception, they implemented rescue and sabotage operations that approached the targets from angles that no rational tactical mind would have considered. The prisoner holding areas were approached through routes that the enemy had revealed during their pursuit of the supposedly failed reconnaissance team. The supply depot was accessed using security protocols they had observed during the emergency response procedures. Vextar's warrior skills were finally called upon, but in ways that violated every principle of his combat training. Instead of direct assault, he used stealth approaches made possible by psychological deception. Instead of overwhelming force, he applied precise actions at moments when enemy attention was focused elsewhere. Ziktar's analytical capabilities were pushed beyond their design parameters as he calculated probability matrices for operations that had no precedent in military history. The success factors for this mission are mathematically impossible to quantify. We are operating outside established tactical frameworks. Lyraneth's empathic abilities allowed her to monitor enemy emotional states in real time, providing moment-by-moment intelligence on psychological readiness and attention patterns. The confusion we created is cascading through their command structure. They're making decisions based on incomplete information and emotional responses rather than tactical analysis. The rescue operations proceeded with supernatural efficiency. Prisoner security was compromised because guards were focused on external threats rather than internal vulnerabilities. Escape routes were clear because search teams had been deployed to areas where they expected to find the infiltration team. Marcus led the liberated prisoners through maintenance tunnels that had been revealed during the emergency response procedures. The routes provided concealment and security that would have been impossible to achieve through conventional extraction methods. The supply depot sabotage operations were even more effective. Using access codes and security protocols observed during the crisis response, they penetrated the facility's defensive systems without triggering any alarms. The sabotage was subtle, designed to create cascading failures that would be attributed to equipment stress rather than enemy action. We have accomplished all primary and secondary objectives, Ziktar reported as they reached the final extraction point. Mission success achieved through methods that violate every principle of logical tactical planning. Commander the Lin materialized in the simulation space, her translucent form showing patterns that Marcus had never seen before. Team 7, you have completed the simulation with unprecedented effectiveness. Your tactical approach defies analysis by standard military evaluation systems. We used human tactical doctrine, Marcus explained again. We identified what the enemy expected, and then, we did something that made their expectations work against them. You simulated failure in order to achieve success, the commander observed. This suggests a level of tactical deception that exceeds anything in our military databases. Vextar stepped forward, his massive form radiating something that Marcus interpreted as respect. Commander, the humans' approach to warfare is unlike anything in Krillian military tradition, but its effectiveness cannot be denied. We accomplished objectives that should have been impossible. Ziktar's analytical report provided comprehensive data on their mission success rates. Team 7 achieved 100% objective completion with 0 casualties and 0 detection of actual operations. Enemy forces remain unaware that successful missions were conducted against their installations. Lyraneth's empathic assessment revealed the psychological impact of their operations. The enemy's confidence has been fundamentally shaken. They know something went wrong, but they cannot identify what or how. The uncertainty is creating decision paralysis in their command structure. Commander the Lin studied the mission data for several long minutes. Team 7 will proceed to the final phase of the simulation. Your performance has been educational for the Academy's evaluation protocols. As the simulation environment prepared for its final configuration, Marcus became aware of attention from beyond their immediate team. Other simulation chambers were monitoring their progress, and he could sense the growing interest from Academy instructors and advanced cadets who were observing their unconventional tactical approach. The galaxy is watching, Lyraneth observed, her empathic abilities detecting emotional patterns from across the Academy facility. Your methods are creating significant psychological responses among military minds that have never encountered human tactical thinking. Marcus looked at his alien teammates, seeing how their understanding of warfare had been fundamentally altered by their experience. Vextar's rigid warrior discipline had been replaced by adaptive thinking that could incorporate deception and misdirection. Ziktar's logical analysis now included variables that had no mathematical precedent. Lyraneth's empathic abilities had evolved to include psychological warfare applications that her species had never developed. What happens in the final phase? Vextar asked. Marcus smiled, realizing that his teammates were no longer thinking like representatives of their respective species' military traditions. They were thinking like humans, adaptable, unpredictable, and willing to attempt things that seemed impossible. In the final phase, he replied, we teach the galaxy's most sophisticated defensive systems what happens when human tactical thinking meets challenges that were designed to be impossible to solve. The simulation environment began its final transformation, and Marcus had the distinct impression that whatever came next would change more than just their Academy evaluations. The elementary battle training simulation had become something unprecedented, a demonstration of warfare doctrines that the galaxy had never encountered. The final phase would determine whether human tactical thinking was merely an interesting curiosity or something that could revolutionize how the galaxy approached military challenges. Marcus suspected the answer would surprise everyone involved, including himself. The transformation was complete, and their ultimate challenge awaited. Around them, the simulation environment revealed the most complex tactical scenario ever created by the Galactic Defense Institute. It was designed to be unsolvable using conventional military doctrine, which made it perfect for testing human tactical thinking. The final phase of the simulation materialized around Team 7 with a complexity that took their breath away. The canyon system had been replaced by something far more challenging, a three-dimensional battlefield that extended both deep underground and high into orbital space. Multiple enemy forces were engaged in active combat across all levels, with civilian populations trapped in the crossfire and critical infrastructure failing throughout the combat zone. Commander Thelin's voice resonated through the neural interface system, carrying undertones of what Marcus interpreted as barely contained anticipation. Team 7, you are now facing the Meridian Crisis scenario. This is a real historical event that occurred in the Vega system approximately 400 years ago. It represents the most complex military challenge in recorded galactic history. The tactical display showed the scope of the crisis in overwhelming detail. 3 separate enemy factions were fighting each other while simultaneously attacking civilian installations. Orbital defense platforms were malfunctioning, creating debris fields that threatened planetary evacuation routes. Underground tunnel systems were flooded with refugees who couldn't be extracted due to active combat above ground. No military force has ever successfully resolved the Meridian Crisis, Commander Thelin continued. The historical resolution required the sacrifice of over 60% of the defending forces and resulted in massive civilian casualties. Your objective is to achieve a better outcome using any tactical approach you consider viable. Vextar stared at the tactical display, his mandibles clicking with what Marcus now recognized as deep concern. This scenario exceeds the capabilities of any single military unit. The scope of the crisis would normally require coordinated response from multiple fleets. Ziktar's analytical systems were struggling to process the complexity of the situation. My tactical databases contain no precedent for operations of this magnitude. The number of variables exceeds optimal decision-making parameters. Lyraneth's empathic abilities were detecting emotional patterns from across the battlefield that painted a picture of desperation and chaos. The psychological pressure from this scenario is overwhelming. The civilian populations are experiencing panic that's affecting military decision-making throughout the combat zone. Marcus studied the tactical display with growing fascination rather than concern. The complexity that was overwhelming his teammates was revealing patterns that his human mind could recognize. It's beautiful. Beautiful. Vextar rumbled in disbelief. This is a catastrophic military disaster. It's a catastrophic military disaster created by thinking like military strategists, Marcus corrected. Everyone involved is following logical tactical doctrine, making rational decisions based on their strategic objectives. And that's exactly why it's a disaster. He began highlighting elements of the crisis scenario, showing how each faction's rational tactical decisions were creating cascading problems that made the situation worse. Look at the pattern. The orbital defense platforms are malfunctioning because each faction is trying to control them while preventing their enemies from doing the same. The underground tunnels are flooded with refugees because surface evacuation routes are blocked by combat operations that each side considers tactically necessary. Ziktar's analytical mind began to grasp the systematic nature of the crisis. Each faction is optimizing for their individual tactical objectives, but the combined effect of their optimization is system-wide failure. Exactly, Marcus agreed. They're all playing the same game by the same rules, which means they're all contributing to the same problems. The solution isn't to play the game better. The solution is to change the game entirely. He began outlining an approach that violated every principle of crisis management that his teammates had ever learned. Instead of trying to resolve the tactical situation, he proposed to fundamentally alter the psychological and strategic framework within which all the participants were operating. You want to negotiate with 3 hostile factions simultaneously while conducting rescue operations in active combat zones? Lyraneth asked, her empathic abilities detecting the emotional complexity of such an approach. I want to give them something more interesting to think about than fighting each other, Marcus replied. Right now, each faction is focused on denying objectives to their enemies. What if we gave them objectives that were more valuable than anything they could take away from each other? Vextar's warrior instincts were struggling with the concept. What objective could be more valuable than military victory? Survival, Marcus said simply. All 3 factions are so focused on defeating their enemies that they're not paying attention to the fact that their combat operations are creating conditions that will destroy everything they're fighting for. He pulled up environmental data from the simulation, showing how the ongoing combat operations were damaging critical infrastructure that all 3 factions depended on. Orbital debris was accumulating to dangerous levels. Underground structural damage was approaching catastrophic failure points. Civilian casualties were creating refugee crises that would destabilize the entire system regardless of who achieved military victory. Military victory becomes meaningless if there's nothing left to govern, Marcus explained. But military commanders trained in conventional warfare often don't think about post-victory sustainability until it's too late. Ziktar's analytical systems were running projections based on Marcus's assessment. Environmental collapse probability reaches 92% within 6 hours if current combat operations continue. Military victory for any faction would be functionally meaningless in a destroyed system. So we changed their perspective, Marcus said. We make the environmental crisis more immediate and obvious than their tactical objectives. His plan was audacious even by human standards. Instead of trying to stop the fighting or pick a side, he proposed to accelerate the environmental crisis to the point where all 3 factions would be forced to cooperate or face mutual destruction. You want to make the situation worse in order to make it better? Lyraneth asked, her empathic abilities detecting the psychological complexity of the approach. I want to make the consequences of their actions impossible to ignore, Marcus corrected. Right now, each faction thinks they can achieve victory before the environmental damage becomes critical. We're going to prove them wrong. The plan required them to conduct simultaneous operations across all levels of the battlefield, using techniques that combined everything they had learned about human tactical thinking with their teammates' specialized capabilities. Vextar would use his warrior skills not for direct combat, but for high-visibility rescue operations that would demonstrate the human team's commitment to civilian protection rather than military objectives. His imposing presence would provide psychological impact that would be impossible to achieve with smaller team members. Ziktar's analytical capabilities would be focused on environmental monitoring and disaster prediction, providing real-time data that would make the crisis consequences visible to all faction commanders. His scanner systems would be reprogrammed to broadcast environmental warnings that would override tactical communication channels. Lyraneth's empathic abilities would be used for psychological operations designed to shift the emotional priorities of combatants from aggression to survival. Her capacity to project and detect emotional patterns would allow her to identify opportunities for de-escalation and cooperation. Marcus would coordinate the overall operation while focusing on the most dangerous aspect, direct communication with faction commanders who were actively engaged in combat operations. He would have to convince 3 separate military leaders to fundamentally alter their strategic thinking while battles raged around them. This approach has no precedent in military history, Ziktar observed as they prepared to implement the plan. The probability calculations are meaningless because the variables have never been tested, which means our enemies won't know how to counter it, Marcus replied. Unprecedented tactics have the advantage of being impossible to prepare for. They began their operations by accessing the orbital debris tracking systems, which had been damaged but not destroyed by the ongoing combat. Using maintenance protocols similar to those that had proven effective in earlier phases, they gained access to space traffic control systems that all 3 factions were ignoring in their focus on tactical objectives. The orbital situation was even more dangerous than the tactical displays had indicated. Debris from damaged defense platforms was creating a cascade effect that would soon make orbital operations impossible for any faction. Marcus used the traffic control systems to broadcast emergency warnings that highlighted the immediate threat to all orbital assets. Attention all orbital units, he announced through hijacked communication channels. This is emergency traffic control. Current debris accumulation is approaching critical density. All orbital operations must cease within 30 minutes or risk total navigation failure. The response was immediate and predictable. All 3 factions assumed the warnings were enemy psychological operations designed to disrupt their tactical plans. Combat operations actually intensified as each side tried to achieve decisive results before their opponents could implement what they assumed was a deception strategy, which was exactly what Marcus had expected. Phase 2, he announced to his team. Now we prove we're serious. Using environmental control systems they had accessed through maintenance protocols, Marcus began implementing controlled infrastructure failures that would demonstrate the reality of the crisis without causing permanent damage. Power grid fluctuations made orbital maneuvering systems unreliable. Communication interference made coordination difficult for all factions. Navigation system disruptions created hazardous conditions that affected everyone equally. The key was ensuring that the infrastructure problems affected all 3 factions simultaneously and equally. No side could gain advantage from the crisis, which meant no side could ignore it as an enemy tactic. Vextar's rescue operations provided visual proof that the human team was focused on civilian protection rather than military objectives. His imposing form became a recognizable presence throughout the combat zone, consistently prioritizing refugee evacuation over tactical advantage. The psychological impact was significant. If the humans were willing to expose themselves to help civilians, the crisis must be genuine rather than a military deception. Ziktar's environmental monitoring provided continuous data streams that validated Marcus's warnings. His broadcasts included detailed technical analysis that military engineers from all factions could verify independently. The data was conclusive. Continuing combat operations would result in system-wide infrastructure collapse within hours. Lyraneth's empathic operations were perhaps the most crucial element. She focused on identifying military personnel who were beginning to question their orders, who were concerned about civilian casualties, or who understood the implications of environmental damage. By amplifying these natural human concerns, she created psychological pressure that made it increasingly difficult for commanders to ignore the crisis. It's working, she reported as emotional patterns across the battlefield began to shift. Combat personnel are becoming more concerned about survival than victory. The psychological framework is changing from aggression to preservation. The breakthrough came when the first faction commander agreed to a temporary ceasefire to address debris hazards that were threatening his orbital assets. Marcus immediately broadcast the ceasefire announcement to all factions, framing it as environmental necessity rather than tactical advantage. Orbital Command Alpha has initiated emergency debris clearing operations. All units maintain minimum safe distance to prevent navigation hazards. The second faction commander faced an impossible choice: continue combat operations that would make debris clearing impossible, or acknowledge the environmental crisis by allowing the ceasefire. Military logic demanded continued attack, while enemy assets were vulnerable. Survival logic demanded cooperation to prevent mutual destruction. Survival logic 1. Orbital Command Beta acknowledging emergency protocols. Implementing temporary cessation of offensive operations for debris clearing. The third faction found themselves in an even more impossible position. Continuing to fight while their enemies cooperated would mark them as the aggressors responsible for preventing crisis resolution. Military victory against 2 cooperating factions was tactically impossible, but joining the cooperation meant abandoning their strategic objectives. Marcus provided them with a way to save face. Orbital Command Gamma. Environmental crisis requires immediate trilateral coordination for civilian evacuation. Military operations suspended pending crisis resolution. This is unprecedented, Ziktar observed as all 3 faction commanders agreed to emergency cooperation protocols. Military forces that were engaged in active combat are now coordinating joint operations for crisis management. It's logical once they change their perspective, Marcus explained. The same tactical minds that created the crisis are perfectly capable of solving it once they start optimizing for survival instead of victory. The joint crisis response operations proceeded with efficiency that amazed everyone involved. Military personnel who had been trying to kill each other hours earlier were now working together to clear orbital debris, evacuate civilians, and repair critical infrastructure. Vextar's rescue operations became the model for joint civilian protection protocols. His visibility and commitment to refugee safety provided psychological assurance that allowed cooperation to develop between former enemies. Ziktar's environmental monitoring became the foundation for joint decision-making. His analytical data provided objective criteria that all factions could accept for determining operational priorities. Lyranetha's empathic abilities facilitated communication between faction commanders who had no prior basis for trust. Her capacity to project and detect authentic emotional patterns allowed negotiation processes that would have been impossible through conventional diplomatic channels. Marcus coordinated the overall operation while maintaining the fiction that environmental crisis rather than human tactical thinking was driving the cooperation. The psychological framework had to remain focused on survival necessity rather than tactical innovation, or the cooperation would collapse as soon as the immediate crisis was resolved. Mission objectives accomplished, he reported as the final civilian evacuation transports cleared the combat zone. Crisis resolved with 0 faction casualties and minimal infrastructure damage. All 3 military forces maintained operational capability while achieving cooperative crisis resolution. Commander the Lin materialized in the simulation space, her form showing patterns that Marcus had never seen from any ethereal. Team 7. You have achieved what no military force in galactic history has accomplished. You have resolved the Meridian crisis with better outcomes than the historical precedent. We changed the game, Marcus explained. Instead of trying to win a military conflict, we convinced everyone to solve a survival problem. The simulation environment began to dissolve around them, but Marcus could sense that their performance was being observed and analyzed by minds across the academy. What had begun as elementary battle training had evolved into something that would challenge the fundamental assumptions of galactic military doctrine. As they prepared for debriefing and evaluation, Marcus realized that they had accomplished something far more significant than passing a training simulation. They had demonstrated that human tactical thinking could provide solutions to problems that conventional military wisdom considered unsolvable. The question now was what the galaxy would do with that knowledge. The debriefing chamber was unlike anything Marcus had expected. Instead of the standard academy evaluation room, he and his teammates found themselves in a vast amphitheater filled with representatives from across the galactic military establishment. Senior commanders from dozens of species occupied tiered seating that extended far into the shadows above, while holographic displays showed detailed analysis of every aspect of their simulation performance. Commander the Lin stood at the center of the amphitheater, her translucent form now displaying patterns that Marcus had learned indicated profound uncertainty. Cadet Shun, your tactical approach during the elementary battle training simulation has created unprecedented interest among galactic military leadership. Please explain your methodology for the assembled observers. Marcus looked around the amphitheater, noting the intense attention focused on him from some of the galaxy's most experienced military minds. The weight of their scrutiny was intimidating, but he reminded himself that intimidation was just another form of psychological pressure that could be adapted to rather than overcome by force. We used human tactical doctrine, he said simply. We identified the assumptions underlying our opponent's strategic thinking, and then we developed approaches that made those assumptions work against them. A massive figure in the upper tiers spoke with the rumbling voice Marcus recognized as characteristic of the Titan species. Cadet, your species' military experience spans approximately 2 centuries. The assembled commanders represent over 50,000 years of accumulated tactical wisdom. What makes you believe human doctrine has anything to offer established military science? Marcus considered the question carefully. Respectfully, Commander, that accumulated tactical wisdom is exactly the problem. When everyone approaches warfare using the same fundamental principles, those principles become predictable. Predictable tactics can be countered by anyone who understands the underlying patterns. A crystalline entity that sparkled with internal light posed the next question. Are you suggesting that chaos and unpredictability are superior to systematic planning and proven doctrine? I'm suggesting that adaptability is superior to optimization, Marcus replied. Systematic planning is incredibly effective against enemies who follow systematic planning, but it can be vulnerable to approaches that operate outside established frameworks. Ziktar stepped forward, his analytical mind providing supporting data. Human tactical doctrine demonstrates consistent deviation from optimal decision-making models. However, this deviation creates operational advantages when facing opponents who assume optimal decision-making. Vextar's warrior instincts had been fundamentally altered by his experience with human tactical thinking. Traditional Krillian combat doctrine focuses on perfect execution of proven strategies. Human doctrine appears to focus on imperfect execution of improvised strategies. The psychological impact on opponents is significant. Lyranetha's empathic abilities provided insights into the emotional dynamics of human tactical thinking. Human military psychology incorporates acceptable levels of failure as strategic elements. This creates a psychological resilience that allows continued operation under conditions that would paralyze species optimized for success. A being whose species Marcus didn't recognize asked, Cadet Shin, your simulation performance suggests that human tactics rely heavily on deception and misdirection. How do such approaches function when facing opponents who are aware of these capabilities? Marcus smiled, recognizing the trap implicit in the question. The beauty of human tactical thinking is that awareness doesn't provide immunity. Even when you know humans will try something unpredictable, you can't prepare for unpredictability. The more you try to counter our adaptability, the more rigid your countermeasures become, which creates new opportunities for adaptation. He gestured toward his teammates. The simulation demonstrated this principle perfectly. Our opponents knew we were conducting reconnaissance. They knew we had gathered intelligence. They knew we would attempt to accomplish our objectives. But knowing what we would do didn't help them counter how we would do it. Commander the Lin projected a holographic replay of their maintenance deception operation. Your team's infiltration methodology appears to rely on psychological manipulation rather than technological superiority. Is this representative of human military philosophy? It's representative of human survival philosophy, Marcus corrected. We evolved on a world where technological superiority was temporary and environmental conditions were constantly changing. Our survival strategies had to be based on adaptability and innovation rather than optimization for specific conditions. A tall, graceful being with multiple arms gestured toward the tactical displays. Your approach to the Meridian Crisis scenario violated fundamental principles of military command structure. You negotiated with hostile forces while conducting active operations. Traditional doctrine considers such approaches to be compromise of military effectiveness. Traditional doctrine assumes that military victory and strategic success are the same thing.